As always, thank you for tuning back into this show. Today's episode is about divorce. Now, hopefully you aren't going through divorce, but if you are, this episode is one you want to listen to. And if you aren't, I think you could still find value and resources in this episode to prepare yourself or others for if life happens. The reality is that for most, divorce is never easy. And when you have a child that may require any unique resources or care, the stakes are even higher. Concerns may come up like, how do we ensure stability? How do we maintain routines? How do I minimize conflict? What legal steps can I take to protect my child? Don't worry though, because we got you covered. On this episode of the Autism Family Resource Podcast, we speak to family law attorney Anna Kay to tackle the tough questions parents face when navigating divorce with a child with any special needs. We will be covering the essential legal insights every parent needs to know. So don't miss this must-hear conversation, because when it comes to advocating for your child, knowledge is power. So tune in now. Welcome to the Autism Family Resource Podcast, where we provide guidance and insights for parenting neurodivergent children. From Pure Hearts Therapy, I'm your host, Brian Keene. Welcome Anna Kay to the show, who's a law attorney specialist and helping families navigate divorce to help them figure out the best solutions for them and their kids.
Thank you for having me, Brian.
Let's go ahead and get started by first telling our audience, big picture, real short, what they could get from this show today. What's something that's going to be a takeaway?
Sure. So, I'm a divorce attorney and mediator. I've been practicing for close to 20 years. I litigated for about 15 years, and my focus now is on helping families figure out how to move forward past divorce and create a better future. And I find myself working with a lot of families who have kids with disabilities, or as one of my former clients called it, special abilities. And I'm hoping that we can talk about some things that can help those families navigate the divorce process a little bit better so that they are protecting their kids moving forward.
Looking forward to this. Thank you. Let's go ahead and get started by jumping into our first topic. What are some of the challenges that may happen during divorce, especially with what you said, if there's any special needs or special circumstances? What's some of those challenges that you see come up?
So the first one is picking the right process for you, right? And that's relevant for any family divorcing. There are three major options. You can have the traditional litigated divorce where you're going through a court process. A judge will make a decision for you. And for some families, that's the best alternative. If you can't work together, if you can't cooperate to make decisions, that's going to be the process for you. But there are alternatives. There's mediation, where you can choose to work with a neutral third party who can help you make decisions jointly. And there's also collaborative divorce process, where each of you hires an attorney who's trained as a mediator, trained in collaborative process, and you try to work together as a team to craft a plan for the future. And in a number of cases where I have been involved with families who have kids with special abilities, collaborative process has been very useful because we were able to be intentional. We were able to involve special needs planning attorneys and incorporate aspects of long term planning in terms of what these parents wanted to do for their children post divorce, even post their own lifetimes, because they recognize that they had a responsibility to their kids that would outlive them. And so they were being very intentional about what they wanted to do. They also recognized that often children with special abilities require a lot more care from their parents, whether parents who are still married to each other or who are divorcing, than children who don't necessarily have these additional needs.
Gotcha. So there's the two types of, or what I kind of took from that, there's the two types of divorce. There's collaborative and then your typical litigation. So would you say, yeah, I heard that the collaboration is obviously better. Are you telling me that with the litigation, is that kind of where some of the challenges tend to come up?
So I would say challenges are in any divorce, right? It's just a level of a challenge. And I would say I don't want to dissuade people from litigation if that's their only alternative, right? If their spouse is not willing to engage in collaborative, if they find themselves in a situation where they need to litigate, I don't want you to feel like you somehow have a worse divorce than the other outcomes, right? Look, you deal with the cards you're dealt, you deal with what you have available and you do the best you can. But I do want to present collaborative as an option if it's something that's available to you, because not many people are aware of it. And if you can work together, if you can be intentional, and I'm not trying to say this is only available for folks who are so amicable and so agreeable that they can sit down at a kitchen table and work out their entire divorce and everything is perfect. No, these are people who are divorcing for a reason, but with the help of professionals, they can reach agreements. And it's just how we get there, the process we use to help them get there, that allows them not only to craft agreements that are intentional and specific to their family and their needs rather than maybe what a statute says or a judge would order, but also then hopefully sets them up for a problem solving process post divorce, which is another benefit of collaborative or mediation rather than litigation. But I do want you to take away from this that there are process options, and maybe at the beginning of your divorce journey investigate those options so that you're picking the best process for you and your family.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. Definitely going that taking the best option for your kids is going to be good. My question kind of is not having I've never been through a divorce. So a lot of people this will probably be their first time going to divorce. What are maybe
Yeah,
some things that they maybe wouldn't have anticipated that might be important in their situation?
I would say as you're starting out, try to think about co-parenting from the viewpoint of how do you want to make decisions about your kids, right? Don't get hung up on the label of custody or your rights, right? As a parent, a friend of mine, a colleague of mine used to say, you have a right to take care of your kids. You have a right to support your kids. You have a right to drive to all of the activities, right? Those are your rights as a parent, right? Do the job. Um, but focus more on how do you and your soon to be ex want to make decisions around what's best for your kids? How do you want to communicate around that? What sort of a co-parenting schedule you want to have for your children, and be very specific rather than thinking in terms of percentages of time. Think about, well, where are the kids going to sleep on a Monday night? Who's taking them to school on Tuesday morning? Because that will help you really think about the reality of your kids' lives, your reality. Look, if you're traveling for work 50% of the time, how would that look like on a regular week to week basis? Take out a calendar, really think about it. From a perspective of, finances, and I know that can be a really difficult subject, right? Try to think about what is realistic. And especially nowadays, finances are tough for a lot of people. Try to think about what makes sense in terms of not just dividing your assets, but also taking care of your children. And yes, your laws in your state might direct certain things, but people also make all sorts of agreements, right? And especially if they're in collaborative process or mediation, and they can talk about what makes sense for their family. And at least in Illinois, when we're using collaborative process or mediation, if these agreements are by agreement and they're equitable, judges will recognize that these are intentional, thoughtful agreements that people are reaching with assistance of attorneys, right? So they're not necessarily going to say, you can't do that. They're actually going to respect those agreements. So it gives you some autonomy to make decisions about your own life and your family's life.
That's huge. I love that in the way you kind of presented it. Like if you guys obviously, like you said, divorce isn't easy if you're going through that. It's going to be a rough process, but for the two parties be able to work together, it kind of puts
Mhm.
everything in their hands, right? As opposed to the state's hands. And that's huge, right? Especially with all the things we're still going to talk about that may come up during the divorce.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. You already listed 2 things as far as, like, minimizing conflict, right? And one was, like, thinking about, the time, what who is best for who to be with what person during the week, and then finances. But what are some other, ways that parents can minimize conflict, to reduce the impact on their child?
Don't use your children as messengers about anything related to divorce. And in fact, if I had a magic wand, I would say try not to talk to your kids about divorce for as long as possible until you and your soon to be ex can be on the same page and can have a conversation about what are we saying, when are we saying it, how are we saying it, and very much be on the same page that what you will share will be age appropriate and will be very much limited to only what the children need to know, right? Because there are things with between adults that happen that we don't necessarily need to or want to share with our kids. They want to know that their parents love them and will provide a safe environment in whatever the new reality looks like. That's it. They don't really need to know what happened between the parents, right? And sometimes we as adults maybe feel like we should share more than they really need us to. And so I'm a big proponent of sheltering and protecting children from the reality of divorce. They really don't want to know. And honestly, like I said, I litigated for 15 years. And trust me, in those 15 years, having adults tell you their experiences as children during their parents' divorce decades later, please protect your children and shelter them during your divorces as much as you can.
I see, I understand, I think there's something to be said about being open and transparent, especially with their kids, but it sounds like to me, that this could be such a messy time that you kinda wanna just have your head straight right before you start to talk about the
Yes,
divorce and maybe what is appropriate at that time to share, and maybe later on some things might be appropriate, but, you know, I think
that's
that's what
all
you're
I'm
where we're getting at.
suggesting. That's all I'm suggesting. Yes, before you share, know what you're going to share and what's age appropriate. And then, as they get older, then conversations might be different.
Gotcha, yeah, because sometimes these things we say just sit with kids, right? And
They
impact
do.
them
They
differently.
do. They do. Look, this one really stuck with me, and this one came from a shrink. Sorry, I know I shouldn't say that anymore. From a mental health professional therapist of mine. Sorry, language slip. Um, and that was, look, kids think of it this way. I'm 50% mommy, I'm 50% daddy. And if someone says your parent is X, Y, and Z, a kid is going to internalize it. I'm 50% that parent. Therefore, I'm X, Y, and Z.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that could be traumatic to say the least. So
Yeah.
definitely makes sense to be intentional about that, right?
Yeah.
All right. Going into the divorce with any child, especially with some of the kids that we're talking about, there's so many things to navigate, right? Like therapies and stuff like that. So what's your take on that? How can parents be on top of that as far as that goes?
That's a lengthy conversation, but we're going to start talking about some of it. And who knows, we might have to come back for another chat. But let's take it in little sort of sound bites. The first one relates to the actual sort of day to day hands on stuff, right? Who's going to be taking the kids to therapies and treatments, right? If there's a schedule, who's going to be going where and how is going to be keeping track of it? So making sure that that workload is shared and how, and that everyone is on the same page. And similarly, in terms of medical appointments, that we're all on the same page and that we're documenting what the plan is. So in Illinois, when you are getting divorced, you need a financial agreement and a parenting agreement. And in that parenting agreement, we detail not just how the parents will make decisions around the bigger stuff, like medical decisions or educational decisions or extracurricular activities or religious upbringing, but we can have as much detail as we want. And so On my collaborative cases, we have put in details around, who's going to maintain medical records, especially around special treatments, or how would parents approach a situation if there is an experimental treatment that is being proposed, or occupational therapy and what is supposed to be done at home, or things like if there's special equipment that the child is supposed to use. Does that equipment travel with the child for parenting time? All of those little details, talk about those because the day to day life of this child requires all of those details. And if you don't talk about it now, it's going to come up after divorce and it will be a source of frustration and conflict between the two of you. So think about it and talk about it now. Similarly, talk about things related to health insurance and not just private insurance. And that is really important now, but also federal and state benefits. And on this piece, I really strongly suggest that you work with a special trust planning attorney so that they can help you create the legal documents that you need to protect yourselves and your children, both now and in the future. And it's not just, estate planning, like having a will or a trust, but it's creating specific documents that will allow you to establish things that will help to provide for your child financially and maintain eligibility for federal and state funding in the future. But because these eligibility requirements can change from day to day, and because they are very individual and situation specific, you really need to talk to someone who is going to understand your family's particular situation and be able to advise because even a very small error could potentially cost your child eligibility for these programs, and that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And you don't want that because for parents who are planning for this, you are planning for a lifetime, right? So you want to make sure that you are maximizing every dollar, whether your own or federal or state funding. So this is really important. And this is, again, the power of collaborative process where we've been able to bring in these additional advisors, the special trust planning attorneys, to help the parents really understand what they can do and help them prepare and plan and make good decisions. That doesn't mean that you cannot have special trusts if you're going through litigation. You can, and please talk to those attorneys as well. It just might mean that you are preparing those documents individually, maybe as an individual parent rather than as part of a team, as both parents preparing them. So either way, special trust planning attorneys, please consult with them. Make sure you're getting good information, plan for your kids. It's just the process might look differently if you're in litigation or if you're in collaborative process.
Okay. So, big picture here, we definitely want to plan ahead, think about all those things we maybe wouldn't have thought of as regards to therapies, trust, finances, all that stuff, right?
Not to get too specific and hung up on detail. An example could be like child support. In order not to lose eligibility, you might have to pay it into a trust once your child is 18. But you need that trust established, right? And so that's why I'm saying you need to talk to that special trust planning attorney early and understand this information again to maximize the benefits for your child.
I see. I think this is why it's important to talk to a professional, right? Because they know all these things. Because I imagine that this would feel very intimidating and scary. My other thought that kind of goes with this is, what if you guys forget something? Put all these things on paper, we're done with. Can we change things in the future after we already made these agreements? And what could that potentially look like?
So I'm going to answer that question in just 1 second. Let me come back to something. Brian, it absolutely is intimidating. It's intimidating to me. And I'm a lawyer. So I want to just put it out there and say, look for an attorney who's not going to make you feel intimidated. Okay? They're out there. These We're human. I mess up in my personal life. People. We're people just like you. and just look for someone who is not going to make you feel intimidated, someone who you will feel comfortable asking questions, who will answer them in a way that will make you feel heard and understood. Because this is the most important thing you will do in your life. You're planning for your child, the most precious person in your life. And so please, 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 listeners, look for the attorney who's going to be the right attorney to help you on this journey. Okay. I had to address that one really quick. Okay. Back to messing up and if we can fix it. Most of the time we can, depending on your state law and what the mess up is about. And I'm gonna explain that a little bit. In general, you are able to go back to court and modify agreements and judgments. There are some exceptions. So, for example, if there's something that's happening related to like benefits eligibility and the special needs trust, that would be a conversation for a special trust planning attorney. I don't really have the ability to give answers on that, and it is very case specific and individual specific. So it's important that you talk to someone who does that type of work. As it relates to divorce and divorce cases in general, for the most part, we can, with some exceptions. So, for example, in Illinois, if you waive maintenance, if as part of your divorce you decide you do not want spousal support or alimony, also called maintenance,
Mhm.
you cannot come back to court in the future and say, I changed my mind. I now want it. So that's an example of something that cannot be changed. But if child support needs to be increased or children's expenses have changed, those types of things can be modified going forward. You can come back and say, Judge, the financial situation has changed. Either someone is making more money, or if someone lost their job, Judge, please adjust it, consider the new reality. Now, a judge will listen to all the information, but he or she might also say, well, I understand things are more difficult, but your child also needs support. So, what are we going to do? And sometimes they might say, the person who lost your job, are you receiving unemployment benefits? Because there might be a portion that should then be turned over to the child. So, again, giving you a little bit more information than what you asked for. But yes, some things can be changed and fixed. Some it depends on what the situation is, what the law of the state says, and what the particular item might be.
Yeah, I think it just goes back to being intentional ahead of time. And maybe that might be a question that you ask your lawyer too. What things for sure do we need to make sure we have in place that we won't get messed up later on, right? What are the most
Yeah.
important things? And there are things, not that you probably don't want to focus on them, but the other things are something like, especially if you're doing a collaborative process, that both of you guys know, okay, we could probably change this later on, right?
Yes. So at least with the collaborative process, we try to be very thorough and we try to give you, okay, let's talk about this now. And looking forward, here are a couple of things to consider. And if you're not ready to consider those sort of long term things, we might put in language that says, okay, we'll come back and review it in a year or two. Or in a year or two, you're going to consider X, Y, and Z and adjust it this way. So, yes, you can definitely look towards the future and see how you might want to address it.
Another question for you. What are some resources for parents that may be beneficial in this process? Whether it's a book, a video, pamphlets, or some resources that may help them, obviously aside from getting a lawyer.
Well, so you are welcome to check out my website, and that's www.anna, and that's ANNA, law.com. So that's AnnaKLaw.com. I have written a lot of articles, recorded a number of podcasts. I am also releasing a book, a series of kids' books, actually, to help parents talk to their children about divorce. And so that's coming out, and I hope that it will help those parents who don't have the opportunity to work with me directly to have these conversations with their children and help them navigate this divorce process. In addition to that, state bar associations often will put out information that can help navigate divorce. So your state might have a bar association. There are also numerous collaborative bar associations in many states. So you might be able to check on that. And those generally focus on divorce. So you would be able to look at that. American Academy of Matrimonial Lawyers, those are attorneys who focus their practice specifically on divorce. They would have resources available as well.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And you're obviously in Illinois. I live
Yes.
in Arizona. Obviously, state to state is going to change. Is there any specific advice that you give to make sure that the individuals kind of aligning with what's appropriate for their state?
So, absolutely. Make sure that you're working with professionals who are licensed in your state, right? So, you're looking for attorneys or mediators, mental health professionals who are licensed in your state. Your state bar association would be able to provide resources. Collaborative community in your state would be able to provide resources. If you're looking specifically for estate planning or special needs trust planning attorneys, there are associations which focus attorneys who do this type of work. Again, they would have a chapter in your state and they would require folks to provide specific service related to that. So I would suggest looking around that. Actually, Brian, I might send you some links and some information, and maybe that might make it a little bit easier. So that way, maybe you share it as links rather than maybe us listing it during the podcast. Would that be maybe more helpful?
That'd be perfect. I'll put them in the show notes.
Perfect. Okay, we'll do it that way.
And is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think would be important to share with our audience today?
I would just want you to know that you're doing a really great job being intentional about this, right? You're listening to a podcast intended to help you make an intentional, thoughtful decision about a difficult subject. And so doing the research, understanding your options, making thoughtful, good choices really shows your care and attention to this. And so make sure that you also take the time to take care of yourself as you're going through this process, as you're taking care of your children as well.
That's great. I love that closing right there. Taking care of yourself and taking care of your kids. I think that's good way to close it off. Thank you so much, Anna, for all your information, all the resources, everything will, as always, be shared in the show notes. And it's a pleasure having you on.
It was a pleasure chatting with you. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
It was a pleasure to have Anna Kay on the show and share all her law expertise with us. I personally thought that she did a great job at giving us a wealth of information in really such a short amount of time. I just wanted to say that my biggest takeaways from this episode is number 1, find good legal consult that's appropriate for you. Number 2, plan ahead and plan for the unexpected. And number 3, take care and considerations when communicating with your child or children about the divorce process so that it's not traumatizing to them. All right, guys, the resources shared in the show are designed to empower your family to thrive. I believe in the power of community for growth and learning, so let's stay connected. Follow Pure Hearts Therapy on any of your social medias, where I'd love to hear from you and answer any questions you have. You'll find all the links, contact information, and more in the show notes. Just scroll down in your podcast player or simply visit pureheartstherapy.com for everything in one place. Thanks for tuning in to the Autism Family Resource Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe for more tools to help your family thrive and live their best lives. Until next time,